Well, hey there team, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to my overview of Final Fantasy XVI. So for those on across it, I do overviews on this channel. It's where I have a look at the first 2 hours of a game, because there's a Steam refund window. Steam says that you can make up your mind about whether you want to keep a game or not in that time, and broadly speaking, as a rule, I would agree and say that 20 hours in, you're usually not going to change your mind about how you felt 2 hours in. So it's a short punchy video, I give you the broad strokes info, keep it around 10 minutes, and then you can make up your mind on your own. So this isn't a new game, well, at least originally it came out on console like a year ago, I suppose. And I'm more of a PC gamer, so this is the PC Steam build that just dropped the other day. I have no knowledge or background with this game, other than the fact that I like Final Fantasy games. I kind of enjoy how different they always are, but still having some core underpinnings as well. They're not really sequels. In fact, it's very rare for them to be sequels, but they will have some sort of character names and, you know, the chicken bloody war birds, they'll be in it as well. But it's worth emphasizing that because I kind of triaged this and knew that I'd get around to playing it on PC in the future, I've been kind of accidentally ultra media blackout on this. I didn't know what any of it was going to be like, and I kind of assumed it was going to be a lot more JRPG, at least thematically. Mechanically, it still is, right? And they're still sticking with the kind of art, if you want to call it, the UI design that's become a modern staple of modern Final Fantasy type games. I don't know how else to describe it, but the text and font type is very distinctly Final Fantasy. But I was kind of expecting this to be closer to something like, oh, I don't know, Visions of Mana, which we looked at recently. More traditional aesthetically. But much to my surprise, this is actually more of a sort of Western, low fantasy, you know, at least in aesthetic. There's still lots of magic and sort of fantastical Japanese elements, but it kind of reminds me more of sort of Dark Souls thematically. Everyone compares everything to Dark Souls, but I'm talking about, like, you know, your aesthetic world build, not the game. You know, even the Dragon's Dogma games, I suppose. You know, kind of when Japan does West fantasy. And look, it might be a bit of a trite, tired thing to say, but this kind of gives me hopes and vibes in the same way that, like, first season of Game of Thrones did when you got into that, especially before it went really off the rails. So if all this stuff that I'm saying is getting you excited, maybe you want to check this out. So I've only put 2 hours into it, but I would hope to review it and play it longer if I can find time in my calendar. But true to form with these sort of games, JRPGs in general, but definitely the Final Fantasy games, the gameplay even so far has been minimal, been a lot of cutscenes and that, but it hasn't actually been tired or drawn out or bloated, I would say. And again, that might just come down to personal preference, but suffice it to say, it's held me. It's compelling, it's gorgeous. It's one of the most gorgeous games I've ever seen, though a lot of it is sort of canned FMV stuff, but when it is in motion, it is wonderful. Having said that though, whatever they're doing with their upscaler, I've played with the graphics and the settings. Like, I'm running on 4K Ultra, and it's pretty much steady, almost locked, as in it feels like something behind the scenes is locking it. Though I haven't found any setting that will let me do it. The only setting that allows me to do anything with frame rate, I've managed to uncap and, you know, put it max chickens. But, you know, I've got my frame counter going, and this game just won't let me off 30 frames, to the point where I turned it right down, you know, resolution, texture settings down to medium, that sort of stuff, but the DLSS is just hyper aggressive and it doesn't really seem to matter. In fact, it kind of ran a bit worse when I set the settings lower, but still being pretty set on 30 frames. Maybe I'm overlooking something, I don't know. But the truth is, you know, settle in with the controller. A lot of the defaults with the camera movement are quite kind of slow. There is sort of a labored cinematic feel, and I'm not really trying to carry water for it, but I suppose look at it this way. It's not some PvP high action fast first person shooter. So I'm not really that fazed that the frame rate's not blowing out. But it's probably worth mentioning because I found that just strange that it basically looks gorgeous, runs really well, and also says, fuck you, I'm not getting off 30 frames. I don't know, if someone knows of a setting that I can tweak, let me know, but nothing jumped out at me. But yeah, all the character acting and character design in general, it's just wonderful. And, you know, look, I'll say what you're not allowed to say, like all these gorgeous women and look, no homo, whatever you want to call it, gorgeous men, you know, good looking people everywhere. It's great. It's not even necessarily sexualized or anything like that. Like, no one's running around in scantily clad typical JRPG fare. They're all in fairly drab, dark, kind of medieval attire, and I just like it. I like all of it, and it's just great to look at. And look, I don't really go in for the sort of cute bait or anything like that, but it seems that we've been launched into a pretty heavy flashback sequence where you're sort of a young man, teen, coming of age, Clive dude. But I think you probably play the rest of the game as him as an adult. But he's got like a pet dog, which is this cute little puppy, and it's the most gorgeous frigging thing you're ever going to see. But yeah, he's sort of embroiled in a political setup. He's the eldest son of the Archduke, or essentially the nominal royal head family man, dad. But it would seem that there's something that supersedes traditional, patriarchal rules of the throne going to the firstborn son. They've got like this sort of phoenix magic generational thing that kind of shunned Clive and skipped and jumped to his younger brother. Now, Clive's not necessarily put out about this. He's a good soldier, actually. He's a bit of an everyman, if anything. But it creates all sorts of interesting tensions, the sickly younger brother, and he's sort of going to be his sworn bodyguard for life to look after him. And Mum's the fucking psychopath and is designed specifically for you to hate her because she just hates Clive because he got skipped over, and, she's essentially a zealot. And Dad is every father figure that you could possibly want rolled into one. So, it's all set up for disaster. You can see it coming a million miles away. And even already there's been some cool twists and turns and developments, and I don't want to give them away this early in. So look, the cinematic quality is executed incredibly well, and they have really nailed the sort of intrigue component. There's a cool little mechanic where you can press a button to pull up info during cutscenes, which is probably going to get more interesting as we go further along. But it is kind of helpful, actually, and sort of pokes at cinematic gameplay design, which I get quite critical of. I don't really like that we have all these games industry awards that just masturbate openly over, voice acting and mocap and all this crap, and just trying really hard to pretend to be Hollywood Junior. And I'm like, the real short-sightedness of that is gaming allows you to do really interesting stuff that you couldn't imagine doing in a movie format, and this is one of them. So you'll be in a cutscene and people are talking, and they're talking about the bloody neighboring kingdom of pricks that we don't like, and you can just press this button and you pull it up and it will have the little talking points, and you can essentially look in the codex and figure it out in the middle of the cutscene. So it's very handy. Gameplay, I haven't really said much about, and at the moment it isn't really I was going to say blowing my socks off. I don't need it to be particularly complex. It's not bad, and it's not overly simple or anything like that. In fact, it's kind of a bit junk food. It's kind of satisfying. You pretty much just, use X combos. You get 4 in a row, that you get a bit of a chain. You've got a dodge, which is fairly generous, sort of a dodge evade. You're staggering enemies. So it's got that sort of character action RPG light sort of thing going on. You can shoot little fireballs and magic, and you can close the gap with a cool dash thing, but that's about it, and that's all it really needs to be at the moment. Again, these sort of games are always going to be slow burn from the start, and I'm cognizant of that. But from what it has drip fed me between its cinematic trappings, world building, and actual core gameplay loop, I'm actually, I'll say it, pleasantly surprised. I kind of just expected more JRPG, but that sort of shines a light on how long it's been since I've played a Final Fantasy type game. 15 being the last one, for example. The bloody NSYNC boy band road trip in a limousine across the desert. That was weird and wild, and I really liked it. It was really cool. And, it's one of those things that you got to be careful you're not a bit revisionist, and I'm getting a little bit more into my sort of personal trappings and biases, but Final Fantasy games just generally slap, and they're always quite creative and original, and they take their learnings and then they sort of build it out into a different direction and do something cool. And yeah, this is wonderful because this is, as much as you could almost argue, a bit of a tried and generic setting in many other spaces, it's not something I recall at least modern Final Fantasy doing. So it's cool to see it in this sort of Euro low fantasy medieval setting. Anyway, team, let me know what you reckon. Fair chance that I review it, so whenever I get around to that, I suppose look for a follow-up video, but otherwise might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.